All right. Thank you to everyone for joining our panel discussion today. Thank you to those around the US and some of our friends in Canada as well for joining us. I know this will be an interesting discussion for everyone. A big thank you to our panelists and thought leaders for taking the time today to educate us on this important topic. Today, we want to talk about DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace, and more specifically, try and address 4 broad key points. 1, what is DE&I? 2, why is it important for businesses? 3, what are some strategies for implementing DE&I initiatives? And 4, what should DE&I actually look like if you're doing it properly? Our overall objective today is to help people thoughtfully analyze, implement, and sustain DE&I initiatives as part of their normal course of business going forward. I want to emphasize that today's discussion is intended to be a safe space to learn from each other. This topic requires empathy, open dialogue, and finding a comfort level with potentially being uncomfortable. One of our panelists, Charlotte Toller, had some good materials, and one thing that I particularly liked addressed being or having the sentiment of assuming positive intent. And I think that's important for our discussion. We are taking questions at the end of today's session. Anyone on Zoom, if you're listening, you can send in your questions anytime, and we'll address as many as time permits. Before we jump into the substantive discussion, I do want to introduce our panelists. First is Jonathan Bean, an attorney by trade and passionate about DE&I. John currently serves as the Senior Vice President, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the NFL. Prior to the NFL, John was the SVP of Global Diversity and Inclusion with 21st Century Fox. He also previously held executive roles in charge of diversity strategies for Time Warner and Alcon. Next is Linda Espinoza, equally passionate about DE&I, or ED&I as they refer to it in Canada. Linda is an experienced business coach and ED&I consultant. She recently obtained her DE&I certification from Cornell University. And Linda takes a pragmatic approach in applying an ED&I lens to business models to help companies become more resilient, more profitable, and more socially responsible. And finally, Charlotte Toller, also passionate about DE&I and also an attorney by trade, and apparently a fan of education. I'm impressed with her education background. Charlotte obtained her law degree from Howard University and later obtained a master's degree in human resources management with a focus in diversity and inclusion from Georgetown. She currently serves as Senior Vice President, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Canon Design. She previously held roles as Manager of Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives at Cleary Gottlieb and as Professional Development and Diversity Manager at WilmerHale. Thank you all again for serving as thought leaders today.
Thanks for having us.
And now to the main event for today. John, you're the lucky one. You get to go first. I'm going to ask you a simple question and a complicated question all at once. And it's the same question. Can you start by setting the table and answering the question, what is DE&I?
Sure. And Andy, thanks a lot for having us. And we appreciate the time with all of you and hope you find it informative. I feel really confident that you will with the 2 partners that I have during this discussion. First and foremost, when you're talking about DEI, and I think that this is really, really important before we get into the technicalities of what diversity, equity, and inclusion means, this is fundamentally about leadership. how do you lead? How do you lead as an individual? And how do you lead as an organization? And how do you lead as a leadership team? If you are not having conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion yesterday, today, and tomorrow, you're not leading, you're managing. And so this is really about leadership. And I just wanted to start with that foundation because this isn't an add-on. It should be a fundamental way that you are leading and being an individual and having your own curiosity. Diversity. Diversity is about all the elements and demographic differences that make all of us unique human beings. There are things that are that can be seen and things that cannot be seen in us. Whether it is someone's gender, or whether it is someone's race or ethnicity, or whether it is someone's orientation or gender identity, whether someone's a veteran or not, whether someone's an introvert or an extrovert, those are all critical aspects of diversity. What the great thing about diversity is that when you have the goal is that you should have the diversity throughout your organization at all levels. So at a law firm, that would be paralegals, that would be assistants, that would be associates, senior associates, partners across the board. You need that. And in particular, the research has shown when you focus on it on diversity from a gender, race, and ethnicity perspective, there are dramatic benefits, which I won't go into too much detail because I know Linda's got some of that information. So that is essentially what diversity is about. There is no one that is in this meeting that is not diverse in some shape or form. But I do also want to emphasize that there are certain aspects of diversity that are greatly underrepresented and that need special attention. And that's why there's so much of a focus on issues of gender, race, ethnicity, and orientation, because those are areas where historically we've had great underrepresentation, especially at the senior levels. Now, when we talk about inclusion, inclusion is really how do you leverage that diversity? Hopefully that you do. So you're working to get that. But then how are you able to leverage that diversity to create an environment that is inclusive, where your all employees have a sense of belonging, where there's been a story told many times that, one is diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is actually being invited to dance. You're being brought into the room, and then you say belonging is dancing and you don't even recognize that anyone's around because it's your party. It is your party. You don't even have to worry. But that's the sense of inclusion. And that is really, really important. Everybody needs to feel like they are a part of the team, that they are empowered, that they are heard, and that leads to better results. So why is diversity and inclusion so important? When you get diversity and inclusion, you will get better innovation, you will get better creativity, you will get better engagement, you will get better retention, and you will get better performance, which I think we all want. We all want this. We want that better performance across the board. Now, I will end with the E part. The E part, people tend to get caught up on the E part. And I get it. It can get a little bit confusing, especially for lawyers, because lawyers are so much focused on the equality part. And a lot of the work and training that we had, it was about talking about equality. And so when you talk about equality, it's all about everyone receiving the same treatment, the exact same treatment, whether it is we're walking into the same building, whether it is the type of benefits we receive. Across the board, you're receiving the exact same treatment. What equity says is we value everyone in their own individual way, but then the focus is what treatment do individuals need in order for them to be their best selves at work? And that treatment might be a little bit different based off of who you are and what your role is. And I think one example that I read, which I think is a wonderful one, and I think everyone will really understand this, is let's assume we all are part of the same company. We have a building, the building's the same. We have the same offices. We all bring in there, but we have different roles and we have different challenges. And you might have some people that have physical challenges, right? But then we don't have elevators, we just have stairs. But we have equality, right? So we have those stairs. And then we have some people that, and I'll say I had a crazy job when I was in college where I had to carry kegs. So I had to carry kegs and I had to bring them to frat houses, so forth and so on. Extremely heavy, extremely dangerous. And if Andy has the job of delivering the mail, I would say that while we might have equality of building, we don't have equality or equity of experience, because I have to carry those kegs or whatever else. I have to carry something very heavy up those stairs, which is very dangerous. And Andy doesn't, because he simply has to deliver mail, which is no heavier than 20 pounds. So when we look at, also imagine if someone has a physical disability, how are they going to get up if they're on the 5th floor through stairs? That is not possible. That is not equitable. That is not fair. And that also hurts the performance of that employee. So I just wanted to give you a sense that there is a huge, while they are connected, there's a huge difference between equality and equity.
Thank you, John. Before we get off this conceptual definition, Charla, I was wondering if you could help us with one more letter that has become more prominent recently, a J to the group for justice. Can you comment on nomenclature for JEDI and why the J and what that means?
Absolutely, and thank you again for having us in this conversation. This is a very important conversation, and I'm glad to be invited to have it with you today. Jonathan did a beautiful job of explaining DE&I. In recent years, and in particular with respect to everything that happened in 2020 around the various racial injustices in the United States, a lot of organizations kind of shifted their focus, and instead of having DE&I initiatives, decided to shift it to JEDI, J-E-D-I, with justice and equity being at the forefront, and more of a focus on racial and social justice issues, as opposed to bringing people into an organization and having a diverse workforce, but also like what happens once you're there, right? What are the things that we need to make sure that we are doing from a justice standpoint to kind of combat a lot of the things that have happened historically for underrepresented people. So there's been a shift in recent years to JEDI as opposed to just DE&I.
Thank you. All right, transitioning to Linda. Now that we have that basic framework, can you offer up your insights on why DE&I, or in your case, EDI, is important for businesses? And I almost wrote that question and I almost put today at the end of it. Why is it important for businesses today? And I thought about it and I didn't like that, because it's not important for businesses today. It was important for businesses before, and it's going to be important for businesses going forward. And without realizing it, the word today almost made it sound transitory, and we certainly don't want that. So why is DE&I important for businesses, period?
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I feel honored to share the screen with these two great professionals in the EDI space. Well, the obvious answer is that it is just the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, is the health of a company. And if something the pandemic has shown us is health is everything. But if you want to expand on why it's the right thing to do, it's because doing it and do it properly, not just to be fashionable, not just to have a PR piece on the newspaper or somewhere, it's because it actually is good for business. It is shown, there's a big study that came up in 2020 from McKinsey and Company that it shows the companies, and let me show here, I'll share my screen. Can you see it? Okay, so they divided in 4 quartiles. And as you can see in here, the bottom quartile, it's actually not achieving their economic goals. And in the first quartile, they're actually exceeding their economic goals. So this is a study that they did and started in 2014. So it's been 6 years. And as you can see, increasingly, the companies who are working genuinely in EDI are not only meeting, but increasing their economic goals. So this is because what? Engagement. If you want happy and engaged employees, they need to feel included. They need to feel that they belong to a company who cares about them. Not only that they produce for the company, but that they can be themselves and that they can feel the safety to bring their ideas, to bring problems or situations that they're facing, and that they're going to be listened to. In a lot of situations, what companies decide to start this journey, and they decide to start with the D, the diversity, and just to bring people, of different backgrounds, ethnicities, religion, they commit the error of just thinking that that's going to solve all their problems, right? Like, yeah, we're diverse, we're going to do great. But no, actually, that's not the case, because employees need to feel that they're not tokenized. They're not there just to be, a PR stunt. They want to really feel included, and they want to see that they have all the tools and that they have a career path in your company so they can actually perform at their best. And that's only going to be benefiting for the company, for the employees, and for the community in general.
Now, beyond obviously having employees that feel engaged and feel recognized, do you have any comments on how and why a diverse work site or a diverse employee field would be better for a business as opposed to something more homogeneous? I mean, what
Yes.
factors does diversity bring into actually better ideas, better implementation, things like that?
So and the cost of not doing it, I think it's incredible. So just $54.1 billion companies lose a year for absenteeism, for people, and this is related to inequities, right? Absenteeism related to inequity. 3 times employees are 3 times more of in companies that they're not doing equity and inclusion are losing $450 to $550 billion per year because your employees are disengaged. 3 times our employees likely to leave in the next year. So you have a lot of rotation, and that is going to cost you a lot of billions, 172 billions in a few years, just to keep, your talent in the company. And 2 times of people, two more times of people that belong to companies that don't do equity and inclusion, they would withhold ideas from the company. So your the pool of ideas and innovation is going to be extremely affected when you are not working on ED&I. And recently, the ISO organization has created the let me get the numbers. It's ISO 30,415, which is Human Resource Management, Diversity and Inclusion, which means that insurance companies are going to be looking at risk management in human resources. So your insurance premiums are going to go up if you are going to be facing, legal battles, PR battles, because your company not working on EDI.
Andrea, I just wanted to make a really quick point here too. Those are all excellent reasons as to why it's important. But one thing that I did want to make note of is we all know right now we're in a war for talent, right? Like there is a war for getting talent into your organization and retaining talent in your organization. And from a recruitment perspective, candidates are increasingly demanding that organizations are focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion because they have their pick of where they want to go. So it's no longer a nice to have or the right thing to do. It's a business imperative. It's a necessity to remain competitive as an organization. And the other thing is, I'm sure as a law firm, you're probably seeing this increasingly. I know at the firms that I was at, it was increasingly happening over the years, but clients are demanding that their outside counsel is taking this seriously. And they're asking, not only are they asking the questions in terms of like, what do your demographics look like? They're starting to dig in even deeper now. They're asking how many, diverse people are on my teams? How much are they billing? Are they actually getting great opportunities? Not just whether or not you have diverse people within your organization, but what are you doing in order to develop that diverse talent? What are you doing in order to retain that diverse talent? So again, it's no longer a nice to have. It's no longer the right thing to do. It's a business imperative.
Sure. You have anything to add to that, John?
Yeah, I would just like to 100% agree with Linda and Charlotte. And I would say that is a huge effort of ours at the league, as well as we're dealing with law firms. We want to know how many minority and female partners you have. We want to know who is working on our issues and what are the billable hours there. And so that is, and those kinds of responses to those questions that we have will also lead to the engagement or lack of engagement we have with law firms in the future. We have firms that we've worked with for a long time, but we're starting to dig deeper there because this is not some flashpoint that this isn't 15 minutes of attention and go away. This is not going away. Believe me, I'm aware of that. This is not going away. This is not going away. And we all have to address it. And if you choose, every organization has the right to not address it too. But if you choose not to address it, then you have to deal with the consequences.
Well, I like the evolution of right thing to do may not really push the needle far enough to smart thing to do because it helps with recruiting and you're going to get better people. And then now to have to do because that's what clients and people that you're working with are requiring. So that's kind of an interesting, when you get to the have to, I think that's going to get everyone's attention.
Can I just
Yep, go ahead. Of course.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that. But here's the thing. When you have to do it, sometimes it leads to, oh, let's just check the boxes. So that's very important. When you're, as a company, you want to start to do this, make sure the C-suite and everyone is convinced to do it. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. It needs to be a systemic approach on this, because otherwise it's just going to be a nice to have on the side, and your employees will know, your consumers will know, everyone will realize that. So it's very, very important on that point.
Thank you. That kind of helps transition a little bit, a good segue. So thank you, Linda. That wasn't planned, but very nicely done. I was following a discussion on diversity, recruiting, and hiring. And someone in the discussion popped in and said, this doesn't have to be this difficult, we don't have to make a big deal. I just look for the most qualified people and diversity will take care of itself. And someone else said, oh, if it were only that simple, and referenced about the importance of what you need to do after hiring, referenced even some biases in the hiring process that people may not even be aware of. So Charlotte, I know people would like to benefit from your experience in this area. Can you share some strategies for implementing DE&I initiatives at a company?
Yes, absolutely. So just to back up a little bit, if you are an organization that doesn't currently have a robust DE&I program, one of the first things that you want to make sure that you're doing is to build out a strategy, right? And so in terms of your strategy, you need to make sure that the initiatives that you're undertaking are targeted to your strategy, they're targeted to your goals, they're targeted to your priorities, because oftentimes what organizations do is they just kind of do all these various initiatives, right? Because it seems like the right thing, again, going back to the right thing to do, it seems like the right thing to do, but they're not thinking about the overall bigger picture. They're not tying their strategies back, their initiatives back to their strategy. They're not prioritizing the initiatives that they are undertaking based on the goals and the strategy that they have. And so you might ask, like, okay, so how do I formulate a strategy? Well, you can get an internal DE&I practitioner. That's one way to do it. That person can help you focus. That person can help you build a strategy. But most organizations that have a strategy have gone and undertaken this whole process to building out a strategy. And a few of the main areas that most organizations target when they are building out their strategy are things like, your recruitment strategy, your retention strategy, which includes things like, what are we doing from an inclusion and belonging perspective to retain our diverse talent? What are we doing from a professional development standpoint to not only, continue to grow our talent, but to have our talent, diverse talent, move up the ranks, right, to be promoted. They also look at leadership accountability. What are the things that we're doing, as Linda mentioned before, from a leadership perspective to make sure that leaders not only are bought into this, but they're held accountable for making sure that they're driving forward DE&I throughout the organization. And then also another piece of strategies includes external relationships. So, what are you doing with respect to partnering with your clients or other organizations that are aligned with your DE&I goals to drive forward your DE&I initiatives? But ultimately, what you want to make sure that you're doing with respect to your strategy is embedding DE&I in every part of the business. DE&I is not this one little thing, this silo over here on the corner that we, kind of pull off the shelf and say, okay, we're going to do DE&I today. No, DE&I needs to be a part of every single piece of the business. It's a part of everyone's job to make sure that they are thinking about these issues. So with respect to your strategy, you want to make sure that you are, again, tailoring the strategy to the organizational strengths. What are the gaps and weaknesses within the organization? And then again, prioritizing your goals based on that. And then you want to look at data. And I'm a big fan of data. You want to look at your retention data, your demographic data, your employee engagement data. And if you don't have one, start doing employee engagement surveys. Look at your exit interview data, just to name a few. Take a look at your data. Your data tells a huge story, right? Look at disparities, all of that. Also get different perspectives from various stakeholders within the organization. People within the organization have different views about like what's going on in various parts of the business. Get those perspectives and make sure that that is tied into your plan as well. And then as Linda mentioned earlier, you need to get buy-in from leadership, because at the end of the day, if leadership isn't bought into this, you're likely not going to get very far. One of the things that I am very keen on, I've been in a couple of organizations doing DE&I, and I see a difference when organizational leadership is bought into this, right? Is your organization ready for this? Because oftentimes an organization may say, hey, we're getting pressure from our clients. We're getting pressure from, our internal employees. We're getting pressure from wherever to do this. Let's just go ahead and do it, as opposed to getting ready first. And the way you get ready is to get one of the ways you get ready is to get buy-in from your leadership to do all of these things in the first place. Because if they're not bought in, you're not going to go very far. Another thing that you want to make sure that you're doing with respect to your plan is building in accountability measures, right? Like, leadership can be bought in, but are they being held accountable for any type of progress that's being made within the organization? And oftentimes I've seen it where I am currently versus other places that I've been, where currently our leadership is being held accountable for various DE&I metrics. There's a DE&I, they get a DE&I report card on an annual basis with respect to various things. At the end of the day, although we would like to think that people within our organization will prioritize DE&I, the truth of the matter is, unless you're being held accountable for it, unless it is something that is a part of your evaluation or is a part of your bonus or your compensation or whatever the case may be, however you want to hold people accountable, it's not prioritized. So building in accountability measures is also very important. And then you want to also measure progress, whether that is through engagement surveys, as I mentioned before, looking at that year over year, collecting and analyzing your demographic data. And again, that's like the first step, right? Collecting the demographic data. What does your population look like over a period of time? Also looking at attrition and retention data, seeing whether or not there's disparities amongst various demographic groups over time with respect to the percentage of which your employee population, your diverse population is leaving your organization, taking a look at that. And then also you might want to consider any type of external accountability measures as well. So for example, in the legal profession, there's the Mansfield rule. And the Mansfield rule is actually inspired by the NFL's Rooney rule, and it's a measurement for law firms in terms of considering historically underrepresented lawyers for a variety of roles, including senior lateral positions, whether or not lawyers are on, diverse lawyers are on client pitches, in terms of the representation with respect to the equity partner promotions and other various leadership roles. But at the end of the day, I think having something like being a part of the Mansfield rule helps law firms or organizations in general be held accountable, not only internally, but like this is externally visible, right? And once the organization says, okay, externally, everyone kind of knows what progress we're going to be making, that kind of puts a little added pressure on the organization to make sure that they're meeting those certain goals. And then once you have your plan in place, you want to make sure that you have the infrastructure in place to be able to hold out your plan. So whether that's from having a diversity professional internally or a team of diversity professionals to help you build out your goals, whether that's having a DE&I council, setting up ERGs, but you definitely want to make sure that you have the infrastructure in place to drive these forward. And I think oftentimes, especially I've seen it within law firms, oftentimes firms have put undue burden on people from underrepresented groups to drive forward diversity initiatives. And then that almost kind of hinders them in a way from doing other things within the organization that they need to do, from billing hours or the like, as opposed to kind of putting that on everyone within the organization to do. It's not just on the diverse lawyers to drive forward these initiatives. And then the last thing that I want to say is, once you have your plan in place, you have your plan, right? But you don't just put it on a shelf and let it collect dust. You go back to that plan on some type of a frequent basis, take a look to see kind of like, where have we progressed over time? Do we need to revise or update our plan? Just because we, have this plan or framework or whatever the case we had, that we've written 5 years ago or a year ago, whatever the case may be, things shift and change. And so you want to make sure that you're continually looking at that, continually looking at areas for growth, continually looking at whether or not you are making progress based on that plan, and continually driving forward change as it relates to your plan. So long story short, those are various strategies for implementing your DE&I initiatives, but they should all be connected to your overall diversity strategy, your goals, and then prioritizing those goals and strategy based upon where you need to focus on.
Now, do your strategies for implementation change, or would they remain the same? You mentioned about leadership buy-in is obviously critical. If leadership doesn't buy in and everyone recognizes it and people just think it's for show, then it doesn't work. So leadership buy-in could come in the forms of what we talked about before. Maybe they think it's the right thing to do. Maybe they think it helps their business stronger, or maybe they feel they have to do it. Do strategies change depending on how leadership is viewing, or what the reason leadership is using to go forward with DE&I initiatives? Like, does it matter if they actually feel it's the right thing to do versus they have to do it? Does that change how you approach it?
It can. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's also important to know that you might not get 100% of people in your organization, or the 100% of your leadership that's bought into this. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't continue to push forward, right? What you can do, though, is educate them, right? Give them some awareness, give them awareness about why this is important, because I think sometimes we think everybody should just know that, as opposed to let's meet people where they are and take them along this journey with us, and understand that even like coming from like a little bit here to just a little bit there is progress in some ways. So yeah, I think oftentimes we just kind of like plow ahead without thinking about, you know, whether or not leadership or certain pieces or parts of our leadership team may be completely bought in, and then kind of meeting them where they are, and instead saying, okay, we're just gonna, they might not be where they need to be, we're just gonna, you know, plow forward and kind of go over here and do all these other things that this other organization is doing because we feel like we need to do it. Progress can oftentimes mean, you know, incremental baby steps, which is still progress, right? So I think it all depends on where the organization is, where the leadership is, and helping them kind of grow in incremental small baby steps at times. So yes, you need to think about all of that, as opposed to just saying it's a one size fits all. So this organization is doing all these things, so we're just going to apply it to our organization. Okay, your organization might not be ready for that.
John, I know.
So
go ahead.
one, and if I could, one is, so this is recorded. If you want the blueprint, and if somebody wants to understand what a chief diversity officer does, and if you want a blueprint of the things that you need to do in order to be effective and operationalize this, just listen to what Charlotte just told you. That is the blueprint of how you get this work done. There's nuances in between based off of your company and your personality and your ability to make things happen. One, I would say DEI strategy is just like any other strategy in an organization. It's a living document. You have to adjust as things happen in the world, as things happen. You have to adjust to the pandemic. You have to adjust to the racial reckoning. You have to adjust to changes in the market or anything else that goes on. With that said, the foundation should always be there, but it's a living document, just like anything else that you're doing in your organization. The other thing is, this strategy is not just, you know, we just don't sit in a desk and put together a strategy. This is done in tandem with the staff at your organization and firm, and of course with the full buy-in. I mean, at least I think it would be like at a minimum the managing partner, right? Like I completely agree. You're not going to get everybody totally on board with things that are going on, because this is, sometimes it could be massively changing stuff, very disruptive. But the key is to get the full buy-in of the core of the leadership team and the larger organization and drive it and push it. It's not going to just be overnight, but you just got to stay the course. And lastly, keep it, well, two things. Keep it simple. Simplicity is power. If a plan is overly complex and you got a million different committees and all of that, then it's hard to figure out what success looks like. With the more you're able to have simplicity, the more clarity is on what success is and what isn't. And then the last thing, which is what Charla so well articulated, is it has to be outcome driven. Because we can have all the great strategies in the world and all this other stuff, but if it's not outcome driven, so what comes out of it at the end of a year or end of 2 years? What specifically? What do you want to do with diversity? You're looking at hiring, retention, promotions. What do you want to do with your culture? What do you want to do with your community work and supplier diversity? What do you want to do with your training? Lay it out, clear things that are clear deliverables that are measurable and outcome driven.
John, you had mentioned, well, when we spoke earlier, you kind of quipped that you think everyone's upset with you now, or you don't think anyone's particularly happy with you now. And we joke that maybe that means you're doing a good job. You had mentioned that this process can be disruptive, and potentially if no one is particularly happy or perfectly happy with you, you're probably covering all needs, bases, and maybe you're doing the right thing.
This job, this work that we do, regardless of which organization you're in, it's not a popularity contest. If you want to be popular, do not do this work. If you want to make everyone happy, do not do this work. We are constantly having very difficult conversations about finding ways to make our organization better. Make us better. Make us do the right things. Make us more equitable. Make us more empathetic and understanding of the huge value that so many others in our organization bring to the table. At the same time, we have to bring everyone on this journey. This is not one group and there's the other group. We have to bring everybody along. And as a result, that's our mission at the end of the day. And sometimes that will make us someone that people are very frustrated with, either not doing enough or doing too much. But at the end of the day, be committed to what's best for your organization and be committed to the work and protect the philosophy and mission and goals and aspirations of DEI.
Linda, do you have any final comments on implementing strategies from what was discussed?
Yes, I just wanted to stress a couple of things that Charla and Jonathan just said, that they're like key, like the C-suite being convinced to do this, it's extremely important. And when hard times come, and they're going to come because this is not easy work, they can pull through and they will still invest in this important work because it's going to become part of the strategy of the company, part of the everyday life of the company. This is a way of life kind of thing. It's not a nice to have. So having that commitment, and yes, as everyone said, not everyone is going to be on board, but if your main and the core leadership is on board, then you can keep going even when hard times come. Two, another super important thing that Charlotte said is that do not put this burden on the diverse people that you have in your company, because you're going to harm them. And not every person that looks like us or has another kind of background knows about EDI. They're not, they're not in this field and they don't necessarily know about it. And putting that burden on them, it's going to limit them in their career if there's not something that they want to do. This work is not easy. So you can be harming your employees of color or of a different background if you're putting all the responsibility on them. Because this is a company-wide program or system strategy that you have to have. So it's not Linda's responsibility only, or Charlotte's responsibility, Jonathan's responsibility. It's the whole company.
Thank you. And John, I wanted to point out that your hypothetical earlier about me carrying kegs upstairs, not really believable. No one's going to hire me to carry anything up a flight of stairs. So, well, I know they would you, but definitely not me. But you initially set the table for this discussion, and since you missed our last prep call, you get to clean up the table too. That's what you get for punishment. You previously talked about having to have metrics and looking at outcomes, and you really do have to measure this. It just can't all be out there without analyzing. Certainly Charlotte said she loves data. There has to be some type of measuring stick metrics for how someone's doing. Can you let us know what DE&I should look like if done properly? Like if a company's doing everything, but they don't know how to necessarily measure it beyond, just the numbers, what other things do they need to look at to make sure they're doing it properly?
Wow, it's a tough question. I think if any of us,
that's why we gave it to you. You missed that last prep call.
I think if any of us had the silver bullet or the answer of how to do this perfectly across the board, we would see an example of a perfect organization that has done this. And in my view, there is no perfect organization that has done this. I think there are organizations that are really good at the D. I think there are organizations that are doing some really good stuff with the I. I think there are some organizations that has taken on the E and committed to things like pay equity and other things like that, which is great. I think that Linda mentioned this. This is a journey. It is a journey. It never ends. I find it funny when people say, hey, it would be great if 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we won't need like a head of diversity, or we won't need to focus on this. Believe me, you all, we're scratching the surface. We haven't even talked about the other dimensions of diversity, which are so complex. Issue of what we call intersectionality. We haven't even got it, neurodiversity. We haven't even touched those things. Why? Because we're still scratching the surface on the major issues. And to me, what we are getting is our policies and practices are getting better. And we're seeing better results with that said. But where I think across the board we have to do better is the accountability of our work. And because as Linda mentioned also, this accountability doesn't rest with the chief diversity officer, it rests with the organization. And also, without sounding cliche-ish, but we've got to do a better job of really connecting us individually, our hearts and minds, and understanding each other, and really valuing, like, we can do this, but you have to believe it. You have to believe it. If you're sitting around a room and everybody looks like you, isn't that something wrong with that? It is to me, because that means I'm missing something, because there's no way that the best people come from one place. The best people just don't come from Western New York. The best people just don't come from a particular company, or just, come from a different school, from a particular school. There are great people everywhere. So if we're not showing that, then that is your bias right there. That's your bias. So to me, I feel like the organizations are really starting to get the policies and practices. Listen to what was laid out today and the similarity of the things that we're saying, and we're making progress. Places are becoming more diverse. Cultures are getting better. But we are still seeing challenges, especially at the top level. And those issues, we have to have the accountability there, and we have to do better. And that is where frankly, I can't give you an organization that I would say is the benchmark there, because I think we're all struggling with it. So who's going to have the leadership to make sure that that happens, because that's where it's going. But who's going to stand up and allow their organization to thrive and allow other people to be part of the party?
Is it fair to say for organizations that do have the right intent, that some form of success or doing it properly is walking the walk and not talking the talk, and actually making it a priority that you talk about it, as Charlotte said, within all of your functions of the business, and you talk about it periodically throughout the year, meetings. You have to dive in. It's not a, hey, we have a group, hey, we have this mission statement on our website, and hey, we did this panel discussion. You know, we're doing great. It does have to actually be walk the walk and fully make that a priority. One thing I wanted to ask, and anyone could jump in recruiting, any comments on hidden biases, or how there can be a challenge for DE&I in recruiting in biases that people don't even realize they have or that are there? Anything that you've seen on your end, Charlotte, if you know what I mean?
Yes. So actually used to do recruitment. I was a legal recruiter for a legal search firm for several years. And I think this is a huge topic, but the one bias that I would say is pretty prevalent, particularly in the legal industry, and I think Jonathan kind of touched upon this a little bit, is the similar to me bias, right? It's the, you know, connecting with somebody because they went to your school, go Hoos, or or connecting with someone because, you know, they have a similar, you know, interest in a sport, or whatever the case may be. Like, oh, you like golf? I like golf too. Oh, you like to do this? I like to do that too. And oftentimes, and honestly, it's human nature, right? Like, we gravitate towards people who we feel like share something with us, who we feel like, you know, understands where we're coming from, or understands kind of what we've been through. And that's total human nature. But you have to try to minimize that kind of innate feeling of, I like this person just because we had a really good conversation about golf, or I like this person because we had a really good conversation about going to, you know, my favorite spot, or I like this person because we had a really good conversation about my time at the University of Virginia. You have to put processes in place in your hiring process to minimize things like that. And one of the things that you can do is to ask your candidates the same questions. And behavioral interview questions are a really great tool for helping to minimize bias, because they're focused on, the behavioral interview questions are focused on past behaviors, kind of foreshadowing future behaviors, right? And so if you're asking the same behavioral interview questions of the same people, and everybody knows, like, these are the questions that you're going to ask everybody that you're interviewing, you have a standard, right, of everybody got asked these were their responses. Let's compare what people said. Another thing that some firms have done, some organizations have done as well, is blind resumes. So like redacting certain things within a resume so that you are less likely to kind of gravitate to various biases, whether it's, you know, because this person's from an underrepresented group, or because this person's a male or female, or whatever the case may be. That's another strategy. But I think the main one that I see more often than not is the similar to me bias, and trying to minimize that throughout the process.
Go ahead, Linda.
Andrew, yeah. Something that I think companies need to stop doing is looking for employees to fit in, and for people to add on instead, to add to the group, to bring their strengths, because then you can have a system that complements each other versus, you know, the same thing over and over. And not to say that one person is the same as the next one. Of course, everyone is unique and have their own things, but it's very important to bring these differences of backgrounds and views and walks of life. That just enriches everyone. Another thing that when it comes to hiring, a lot of things that I hear is like, well, I just don't think there's enough professionals in blank, whatever you want to say, accounting, lawyers, whatever. There's just not enough Latinos, Latine, or, disabled people who would do this. So how am I going to hire them if they don't exist, right? That is a lie completely. And there's just an excuse not to look harder and to change your process to hiring people. Obviously, you're not looking in the right places. You're not talking to the communities that you want to hire. And I think that's very important, right? As a company, if you want people from different communities to join, you need to have a communication with those communities. It just is.
Now, there is a question I want to put out, and I apologize. I don't know if I fully understand it. I think it relates to what we just talked about, but one of you three may understand it better. A question from Russell. Can you give an example on how to identify if a company has baked diversity into a job description? Any thoughts as to, and Russell, you can type in, but they say again, can you give an example on how to identify if a company has baked diversity into a job description? I don't know.
I think what that could be, for example, the type of pronouns that you use in a job description, the type of words you use as an adjective, like we are looking, the ideal candidate is a personality. There's a lot of different things, whether you're trying to direct someone who's saying you have to be an extrovert to get that role. You have to be a personality to get that role. You have to be, it could be, he is supposed to do this. He is supposed to do that. And right away, there are those kinds of words that are in job descriptions, which also to the reader even is an unconscious thing that's telling them, not for me, not for me, not for me. So try to have as neutral words as possible that are not emphasizing or stating something that you're really not meaning to say, by being directive in a way like that. And I would just call it like neutral language in a way that will welcome all to be involved and to apply, instead of, kind of like having language that really says, what I'm really looking for this person, not you.
Thank you, John. Is it fair to say a little bit what you talked about before, Linda, that if a company or business is genuine about wanting to be diverse, but says they can't find diverse candidates, that there's something better that needs to be done with how they're recruiting? Is that a fair statement, that if they say, oh, we really want to, but we can't seem to find anyone,
That's really a fair statement.
They need to dig deeper? I know I'm treading
right.
softly, but there's something they're not doing correctly as to how to locate and recruit these people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So that really should never be the answer of, well, we're trying, no one ever seems to show up. Well, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, it's your system, it's not the people.
Or, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say the other thing that I hear is we're trying and they interview, but then they don't accept the opportunity because they don't see diversity within the firm or the organization, right? So it's like, unless we already have a diverse population, we're having a hard time getting a diverse population. But what I say to that is, are you telling these candidates what you're going to do once they are there in order to make them feel included, to make them feel like you're developing them as a person, or as, with respect to their roles? Like, what are you saying to the candidates in terms of what they can expect once they are there? Because at the end of the day, that's what they're most important. That's what they're most concerned about, right? Like they're saying, okay, once I get to this organization, if I see somebody that's like me, I'm probably going to get mentored. I'm probably going to get, that person to take me under their wing. I'm probably going to get the things that I need within that organization. So are you being overt to your diverse candidates about what it is that you're doing internally to retain and develop them once they're there?
Thank you. I want to brag, but it's 3:01. That's pretty good. I'm always afraid of driving the bus and ending like a half hour too late, but I think we did really well here. John, Linda, Charlotte, thank you. I don't think we could have had 3 better panelists to give all your viewpoints. I'm really appreciative, really thankful, and really impressed, to be honest, with your backgrounds and your passion about this subject. For anyone out there in the World Wide Web world, if you need the New York CLE code for this, it is DEI 2022, DEI 2022. Thank you again to John, Linda, and Charla for participating, and everyone have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Take care.
Bye, Charlotte. Bye, Linda.
Take
Bye.
care.